Are freight brokers going to go out of business because of the new FMCSA ruling? Today I'm going to share with you fact versus fiction about the new FMCSA freight broker fraud protection ruling. Before I dive in, first let me state this for the record. The goal of this, based on the FMCSA's ruling, is to reduce the number of carrier claims against broker bonds that go unpaid. So the fact is, there are some times when carriers do not get paid by brokers. They file their claim against their surety bond or their trust, and then unfortunately, for whatever reason, those claims go unpaid, and the carriers feel the wrath and the financial hardship of not being paid those claims after hauling the load. So that is the stated goal. Okay, so there are 5 parts to this new ruling, but only 3 of them are focused and will have serious impacts on brokers. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. But please note, all of these rules go into effect January 16th, 2024, which is right around the corner, but each one has a different enforcement and compliance date. So you got to pay attention as I go through each of these 3 new rules. Part 1, assets readily available. In part 1, it reads, cash, irrevocable letters of credit issued by a federally insured depository and/or treasury bonds are the only acceptable categories of assets readily available in broker trust funds from which to pay claims to carriers. It goes on to say that other asset classes like real estate or stocks or other securities are too risky and/or volatile to be used, and so you cannot use those types of assets. Now, this is really going to have an impact mainly on brokers that are using a broker BMC 85 trust, because now it means that in order to secure that trust, you can only use an irrevocable letter of credit or treasury bonds to pay out the carrier claims as an asset standing behind the trust. The good news is, while this ruling goes into effect January 16, 2024, the enforcement date for Part 1 that I just described to you is not until January 16th of 2026. So that's 2+ years from the time of this video. The reason why they're doing that is obvious to me. They want to give these trust companies as well as brokers time to become compliant with these new rulings, and that just can't happen overnight. Part 2 involves the immediate suspension of freight broker authority by the FMCSA. Let me explain to you the details. Part 2 says, when a broker or freight forwarder's financial security falls below $75,000, the FMCSA may suspend its operating authority registration. They go on to say, the agency explained that a broker's available financial security may fall below the $75,000 because it either consents to a drawdown based upon a claim, or if it does not respond to a valid notice of a claim from a surety or trust provider, or if the claim against the broker is converted to a judgment. Okay, this last part is important, so lean in. It says that if the broker's available financial security falls below the $75,000 mark, that they have 7 days to replenish the funds, and if they don't, the FMCSA will issue a suspension of their broker authority. The good news about Part 2 is the enforcement date is not until January 16th, 2025, which is more than a year from the time of this video. Obviously, once again, they're doing that in an effort to try to make sure that the broker and trust providers, as well as brokers, have time to get in compliance. Part 3, surety or trust responsibility in case of broker financial failure or insolvency. Let me share with you the details. The ruling says surety providers or financial institutions may cite financial failure or insolvency of the broker as grounds for canceling a surety bond or a BMC 85 trust agreement when the provider or institution either makes a payment against the bond or trust or expects to make a payment after aggregating multiple claims. Part 3 of this ruling goes on to say, if the surety or trustee becomes aware that a broker is experiencing financial failure or insolvency, it must notify the FMCSA and initiate cancellation of the financial responsibility, and the FMCSA will publish a notice of failure. Okay, so I'm going to give you my takeaway on these new rulings in just a second, but please note there are 2 more components to this 5-part ruling, but the last 2 components are focused more on regulation regulating surety bond and trust providers and shouldn't have a huge impact on brokers. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those two. Okay, so here's my hot take on this new FMCSA ruling. Number one, the sky is not falling, people. Trust me. This is really should only impact fraudulent brokers and brokers that have poor financial management processes and skills. The reality is, if you pay your carriers on time and you respond and resolve any bond claims that come in from carriers, you should not have an issue. I remember back in 2003 when I first got started in the brokerage industry, the broker bond was only $10,000. But then 10 years later in 2013, the FMCSA forced all brokers to increase their bond to $75,000. And I remember everybody back then thought the world was going to end and the brokerage industry was going to disappear. Well, guess what? The fact is, it's 2023. There's more brokers than there were in 2013. The industry is thriving. Bond costs have stabilized. And the fact is that the industry is doing well, even though everybody thought the sky was going to fall. Number two, I'm not a big fan of government intervention in private business sector. There's way too many examples of unintended consequences that turned out to have worse results than the original problem. So I believe the answer to this challenge is simple. I truly believe that carriers and factoring companies just need to do a better job monitoring and managing the credit that they extend to brokers, just like brokers do with all of their shippers. And if you're a broker that holds payment from the carrier in the event of a freight claim, you may want to consider adding something to your broker-carrier contract. Now, I'm not giving you legal advice, but this is what I would do in advance of the enforcement date for these new FMCSA rulings. The clause could say something to the effect of carrier payments may be offset for unresolved freight claims. Payment on claims may be withheld until the claim process has been finalized. Now, the reason why you want to add that is because in the event that you withhold payment from a carrier and the carrier then files a claim on your bond, you can then show the bond or trust company that that carrier has contractually agreed to wait until the claim has been resolved to get their payment. So that will dissolve that claim and then will not trigger any sort of negative consequences for you as the broker. My fourth and final takeaway from this new ruling is the fact that the enforcement dates are ranging between January 16th, 2025, which is over a year from the date of this video, all the way out to January 16th of 2026. That gives you a year to 2 years to make adjustments and to put yourself into compliance with these new rulings to avoid any issues. So you do have time to course correct in advance of any enforcement notices. So if you guys enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this update, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. But the fact is, if you're curious about how to get shippers and you're struggling with freight broker sales and how to do the outreach and get new customers in any economy, booming or bust, you need to get on my wait list for the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator. That's my 5-week freight broker sales training program where I teach you all my best freight broker sales strategies, tactics, tools, and my entire system that allowed me to do over $200 million as a freight broker. You can get on the wait list. Just go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com/waitlist. Appreciate you guys being here. If you don't get on the wait list, just so you know, it sells out every single time. It's sold out now, but we will be reopening it in the very near future. So make sure you get on that wait list, and I'll see you next week on the next Freight Broker Bootcamp Live.